So I think the best way, I don't know, I struggled with how to start this story, but basically, years ago, I used to look at marriage as when my life would begin. Just from how I was raised and the things around me. I idolized marriage, and I mean, obviously, if that's when life begins. And my parents had gotten married right out of college. I just assumed that I would get married right out of college. I dated my first boyfriend out of college, and I was pretty set that we were going to get married. We dated for over a year and a half, and we were talking getting engaged and getting married, and instead of that, we broke up. I was still convinced for years after that we were going to be together. And it wasn't until about 2 years after we broke up, a big situation that happened finally made me realize that I had been sitting around wasting my life, waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. I decided then that I was going to start living life now. The beginning of 2016, I started writing down goals for my life, even if they were simple goals. And I wrote down some longer term goals and goals or resolutions for that year. And I didn't accomplish nearly all of those goals, but I definitely did way more than if I hadn't written them down and hadn't been intentional about them. And I think it was probably about that time that I realized I kind of had 5 overarching goals in my life. I did and still do want to be married someday and have kids. I would like to have a house someday. I would like my career to be at a certain point, and I would like to travel. So fast forward to a few years later, my career at this point was pretty big in my life. I never used to view myself growing up as being career driven or climbing the corporate ladder, but I was at a pretty good place a few years ago, a good position, and I was making decent money and actually able to set some aside. And then I had it in my head that I wanted to eventually work for myself, but I thought, well, I can do that like a year and a half from now when I saved up more money and I've just gotten to a better place in life and everything. And then it was a few months after I thought that the company that I was working for had less and less work coming in, and I wasn't even sure if I could even pay my rent. So I ended up leaving the company and was under a non-compete, meaning I couldn't work in that area in my industry for a year and a half after leaving. So I was really kind of at a loss to know what to do. I'd lived in South Carolina for 7 years at this point, past college, and I'd lived in the same little house for 7 years. My family had a lot of transitions going on during that summer, so I decided to move back to Maine and help my family over the summer and kind of figure out my life. So it was during that summer that I started to struggle with depression. Now I say that, I know I didn't struggle nearly as much as many people do. Not nearly as much. But here I was, almost 30, and I felt like I hadn't gotten anywhere in life. wasn't in a relationship. I didn't have any kids. I didn't even have a house or much money saved up. I hadn't traveled very much at all. And I felt like I'd finally gotten to a good place in my career, only for that to all feel like it had gone away. I was doing odd jobs here and there. I was digging post holes. I was doing a bunch of random stuff to make ends meet. And it was at the end of that summer that I met my second boyfriend. We met right before I left to go back down to South Carolina because I had a nannying job lined up down there. And for months, I nannied and tried to get work online and through other sources. And I even tried to get any kind of work, even things that weren't related to my industry. And I felt like everywhere that I turned, everything that I tried, I just kept running into roadblocks. My boyfriend and I had been dating long distance at this point, and we were talking about how we were going to make our relationship move forward, since he was in Maine and South Carolina had become my home at this point. I decided that I could see myself moving back to Maine, to one of the bigger cities, and I was still under my non-compete, so it wasn't, it wasn't as big of a deal. I had another job lined up with a longtime friend of the family, about 2 hours away from where I was living, so I was commuting about 4 days a week. I wasn't exactly sure what was going to happen. My life for the last year, I had pretty much just known what life looked like a few months in advance. Like 3 to 6 months. I knew obviously that our relationship might not work out, and even the job situation, I knew it was pretty flexible for both of us. So I was up here over the summer, and my boyfriend and I broke up in October. And then I moved closer to the place that I was working, so I didn't have to keep commuting back and forth, in early November. And shortly after that, that job fell through. So I felt essentially stuck in this new place, had just been broken up with, and wasn't sure how I was going to provide for myself. I felt like I was in kind of a fight or flight mode. For the first month or so, I was just trying to keep it together. I could have made it easier on myself and just moved back home, but I knew that I was much more likely to fall back into a depression if I did that. And I really felt like the Lord had provided the place for me to live. I really felt like it was good for me to stay in the bigger city. There was just so many more opportunities, and people in my career, people closer to my age and in my stage of life. And even the fact that I was paying rent, honestly, was kind of a motivation to make things work. I wasted so much time waiting for my first relationship to work out that this time I decided, about 2 days after we broke up, that, well, maybe I'll travel. And literally a day before I lost my job, I got a big project. This was, a client I had done a much smaller project for, and I had gotten online. I believe the Lord brought that just at the right time, and maybe even took away the other job to give me exactly what I wanted. I picked up another client in January, February, another big client. So it wasn't too long after that I decided, well, if I can work from anywhere, I might as well work from anywhere. and I might as well try to travel and work and grow my career. Beginning of 2019, I wrote down goals for the year, where I wanted to be in my career, where I wanted to travel to. The goals in my life, they've shifted depending on the direction that my life is heading. And I think that's okay. And honestly, like, I look back now, it's been frustrating to have some of those life changes. But really, every time that my plans have changed, it's led me to a better place, and it's grown me along the way. And I want to encourage you that if you're going through a tough time right now, whatever that may be, I want to encourage you that you're not alone. And sometimes I think it's okay to not be okay. Sometimes I think we frustrate ourselves more by trying to get back to a sense of normal right away. I hope that you live life now. I hope that you make the most of where you are in life right now. Don't wait for some other situation to come into place, especially something that's outside of your control, which we can only control ourselves and our own decisions. I encourage you to make goals and to figure out a way to reach those goals. If you're watching this when I post it, I wish you a happy new year. I wish you the best, and I'll see you guys later. I should probably trek back now, out of the woods. It's 40 degrees, almost 40 degrees, heat wave.